All right, welcome to another deep dive. Excited for this one. We are diving into Kubernetes today.
Oh, fun.
Yeah, based on this article that you shared with me.
Right.
I gotta say, Kubernetes always seems so like intimidating, right?
Yeah.
All the jargon. I don't know.
It does have a bit of a sci-fi like vibe to it, right?
Yeah, totally.
It actually comes from the Greek word for pilot, right? Helmsman. So it's kind of fitting because it steers these applications.
Oh, interesting. So it's kind of like the captain of a container ship, making sure everything runs smoothly.
Yeah, exactly. Keeping everything on course.
I like it. Okay, so we got this kind of like overarching idea of what it is, but why? Why do we even need Kubernetes?
Well, imagine you've built this awesome app. And
Okay.
and it's in containers, right?
Yeah.
And it's getting really popular.
That's the dream, right?
Yeah, but here's where it gets tricky. As you get more users, you're going to need more servers.
Right.
And so suddenly you've got like a ton of containers across all these different machines. Right.
And it becomes a nightmare.
Yeah. Yeah. I can see where this is going for sure.
Yeah. I mean, how do you make sure they can all talk to each other?
Right. Right. And how do you keep track of them all?
And what happens if one of those servers crashes?
Ugh.
It's a mess.
Yeah. I've had my fair share of projects that have, crashed and burned because of that.
That's where Kubernetes comes in, right?
Okay.
It's like the hero of the story.
All right. Tell me more.
So it's like an orchestrator. So it handles all of that stuff.
Yeah.
Like resource allocation, communication. It makes sure all of your containers, no matter how many servers you're using, they're all working together.
So it's like the ultimate container management tool.
Basically, yeah. It's pretty powerful.
Okay. Okay, so I'm starting to get it.
All right, good. It might be easier if we think of it like an orchestra.
Okay. I like analogies. Let's do it.
All right, so each musician is like a container, right?
Mhm.
And their instrument is like a specific task.
Okay, got it. So you've got all these different instruments, and they all have to play together in harmony to create the music.
And Kubernetes is the conductor.
Exactly. Making sure everyone is in sync.
Hmm.
And the orchestra performs on a stage, right? In Kubernetes, that stage is called a cluster. It's basically a collection of machines.
Oh, okay. So the machines are kind of like the individual members of the orchestra.
Yeah, each one contributes to the overall performance.
Got it. So if the cluster is the stage and the machines are the musicians, then what are like the instruments?
So the instruments are the containers themselves.
Ah, okay. That makes more sense.
Right. So, you might have a container for your web server, a container for your database, and so on.
So like a string section and a brass section and all that.
Exactly. And just like in an orchestra, we've got a few key players, right? We've got the conductor, of course, that's the API server, controls everything.
The boss.
Yeah, basically. And then we've got the scheduler. That's like the person who assigns the instruments to the musicians, or in this case, containers to the machines.
Right. Making sure everyone has the right part to play.
Exactly. And then we have the kubelet, an agent on each machine that makes sure the musicians, the containers, are doing what they're supposed to be doing.
Okay, like making sure everyone's practicing their parts.
Exactly. And then finally, there's the controller manager. This is the one that makes sure the orchestra, the application, always stays in tune. So if a container crashes, it restarts it. If a machine becomes unavailable, it reschedules the containers to a healthy machine.
So it's like a whole team of stage managers behind the scenes making sure the show goes on.
That's a great way to put it. But we also need to think about the sheet music the orchestra's following, right?
Okay, yeah. Like the instructions for the whole thing.
Exactly. And Kubernetes has its own set of terms to describe how everything is organized.
All right, let's get into it. What are some of these key terms?
Well, one of the most important is the pod.
Okay. What's a pod?
So a pod is like a group of instruments that are playing together. In Kubernetes, a pod represents one or more containers that share resources and network connections.
So like a string quartet or a brass ensemble within the larger orchestra.
Exactly. And to ensure we always have enough of a specific instrument or container, in our case, we have a replica set.
What does that do?
This makes sure that a certain number of identical pods are always running. It's like having understudies ready to step in case a musician gets sick.
Oh, okay. So if one pod goes down, another one can seamlessly take its place.
Exactly. And then we have the deployment.
Okay, what's a deployment?
A deployment is like the blueprint, like the conductor score. It defines how many pods should be running, what container images to use, and how they should be updated.
Oh, okay. So it's kind of like the master plan for the whole application.
Precisely.
Okay, got it. So we've got the pods, the replica sets, and the deployments. What else?
Well, what about the audience? How do they experience the music?
Oh, right. Good point.
That's where the service comes in. A service provides a stable network address, so it directs users to the right pods.
So it's like the concert hall itself, providing access to the music.
Perfect analogy.
Wow, okay.
Huh.
You just covered a lot of ground there. Feels like a crash course in Kubernetes terminology. But I gotta say, I'm impressed. It's starting to make a lot more sense.
Good, good. That's the goal.
I'm starting to see why this is such a big deal in software development. But I'm also realizing there's like a whole lot more to it than we've even scratched the surface of.
Oh, absolutely. We've just laid the foundation.
Okay, well, in the article you sent me, there were a few things that really caught my eye. Features like automated scaling, intelligent scheduling, and automated self-healing.
Oh, yeah. Those are some of the really cool features.
Yeah, they almost sound too good to be true, like something straight out of a sci-fi movie.
Well, they might sound futuristic, but they're very real and incredibly powerful. Do you want to dive into those a little deeper?
Absolutely. Let's do it. I'm really curious to see how these features take Kubernetes to the next level.
Okay, so let's start with automated scaling. This is one of the things that makes Kubernetes so powerful. Remember our orchestra analogy?
Yeah. The musicians and the instruments and all that.
Right. Well, imagine the music starts to get really intense. You might need more instruments to create the desired impact.
Okay, yeah. More musicians on stage.
Exactly. Kubernetes can do the same thing for your application. It's constantly monitoring how much CPU and memory your containers are using. And if it sees that they're reaching their limits, it can automatically create new pods to handle the extra load.
Wow. So it's like the conductor can just like summon more musicians to the stage whenever things start to get a little crazy.
That's a great way to put it. And the best part is it all happens automatically. You don't have to do anything.
That's amazing. No more late night scrambling to add more servers when there's a sudden traffic spike?
Nope. Kubernetes takes care of all of that for you. It's all about making sure your application can handle whatever comes its way.
Okay, that is super impressive. What about intelligent scheduling? What does that even mean?
Well, imagine that the conductor not only adds more musicians, but also carefully considers where they're placed within the orchestra.
Okay, yeah, so it's not just about having enough instruments. It's about making sure they're arranged in a way that optimizes the overall sound.
Precisely. In Kubernetes, each machine in the cluster has its own set of resources like CPU, memory, and storage. And some machines might even have specialized hardware, like GPUs. So when Kubernetes needs to deploy a new pod, it takes all of that into account.
So it's like matching each container to a machine that has the right resources available.
Exactly. It's all about making sure that the application runs as efficiently as possible and that each part of the application is running on a machine that can handle its specific requirements.
That's pretty sophisticated stuff. It's like Kubernetes has this deep understanding of each container and knows exactly where it will perform the best.
Yeah, it's pretty amazing. And
Yeah.
then there's automated self-healing. This is one of the features that I think really sets Kubernetes apart.
Okay, tell me more.
So remember how we talked about the controller manager, the
Yeah.
one that's making sure the application is always running as it should be?
Yeah, the stage manager behind the scenes.
Well, automated self-healing takes that concept even further. Kubernetes is constantly monitoring the health of your containers, and if something goes wrong, it can automatically fix it.
What do you mean, like if a container crashes?
Exactly. Kubernetes will just restart it. And if an entire machine becomes unavailable, it can reschedule the containers that were running on that machine to other healthy machines in the cluster. It's really remarkable.
So it's like having this self-tuning orchestra that's always striving for perfect pitch no matter what challenges come up.
Exactly. And in today's world where uptime is so crucial, that kind of resilience is essential. You can't afford to have your application down, even for a short amount of time. Kubernetes helps ensure that your application is always up and running, no matter what.
Okay, so Kubernetes is starting to sound less like a sci-fi concept and more like, a dream come true for anyone who's ever had to manage complex applications.
I think so. It's like having this super efficient, always on IT team that's dedicated to keeping your application running smoothly. And the best part is it all happens behind the scenes, so you can focus on what's really important, developing your application and innovating. You don't have to spend all your time worrying about infrastructure and keeping the lights on. Kubernetes handles all of that for you.
So to be clear, Kubernetes is making it easier to manage these applications, even at a large scale. It's handling all the complexities.
Exactly. It's like automating a lot of the hard stuff and making it much easier to deploy and manage sophisticated applications.
That's incredible. But I have a feeling we've only scratched the surface of what it can do, right?
Oh, absolutely. There's like a whole ecosystem of tools and extensions and best practices within the Kubernetes world that we haven't even touched on yet.
Yeah.
But, this foundation that we've laid will be really helpful as you continue to explore.
Okay, good. So we've talked about, pods and deployments and services and all these like core components. Are there any other key concepts or terms that are important to understand, kind of like a next level up from what we've already covered?
Sure. One that comes to mind is namespaces. Think of it like different sections within our orchestra.
Okay.
So, you might have a namespace for development, another one for testing, and then a separate one for production.
So like different rehearsal spaces for the orchestra to practice in.
Exactly. It's all about, organization and control. And then there are config maps and secrets. These are ways to manage configuration data and sensitive information within your Kubernetes cluster.
Okay, so config maps are like the sheet music, and secrets are like the conductor's secret notes and instructions.
That's a great way to think about it. Config maps store non-sensitive information that your application needs, while secrets are for things like passwords and API keys, things that need to be kept secure.
Right. It makes sense to keep those separate.
Exactly. And understanding how to use them is really important for building secure and reliable applications.
Okay, so we've got namespaces, config maps, and secrets. This is fascinating. It's like we're peeling back the layers of the onion, getting a more and more complete picture of Kubernetes.
Exactly. And as you learn more about these concepts, you'll really start to see how powerful and flexible Kubernetes can be.
Okay, I'm definitely getting that sense.
Yeah.
But before we get too lost in all the technical details, can we zoom out for a second? What are some of the real-world benefits of using Kubernetes? We've talked about, scaling and self-healing and all that, but are there any other advantages?
Yeah, for sure. So one big benefit is that it can really speed up your development process. Since it automates so much of the deployment and management process, you can release new features and updates much faster.
That's huge, especially in today's fast-paced tech world.
It is. And it can also improve resource utilization by, intelligently scheduling containers and managing resources efficiently. You can get more out of your hardware, which could potentially save you money on your infrastructure costs.
So that's a big win for businesses.
Absolutely. And if you're thinking about moving your applications to the cloud, Kubernetes can make that process a lot smoother.
Okay, so it's not just for these like big tech giants.
Yeah.
Smaller businesses and individuals can use it too.
Yeah, absolutely. While it might seem like a complicated technology at first, there are tools and services available that make it much easier to get started with Kubernetes, regardless of your technical expertise or the size of your organization.
That's great to hear. It makes this technology much more accessible. It really opens up a lot of possibilities. But I'm also curious, what are some examples of companies that are already using Kubernetes today? We've been using this orchestra analogy, but I'd love to hear about some concrete use cases.
Sure, so one great example is Spotify. Yeah, they use Kubernetes to manage their massive music streaming platform. They have millions of users, and Kubernetes helps them handle all of that traffic.
So it's really being used in the real world to handle these really high-demand applications.
Yeah, absolutely. Another example is Pokemon Go.
The game.
Yep. They also rely on Kubernetes to manage their global infrastructure and handle the huge number of players they have around the world.
Wow. Those are some impressive examples.
They are, and the use cases are constantly expanding. Companies are using Kubernetes for everything from machine learning and AI to financial trading platforms to e-commerce sites.
So it really is a versatile technology.
It is. It's not limited to one specific industry or type of application. And as the world becomes more and more reliant on software, Kubernetes is going to play a bigger and bigger role in shaping the future.
Well, I'm totally convinced. I'm ready to dive into those online resources you mentioned and start exploring the Kubernetes ecosystem more deeply.
Awesome. You'll find a ton of information out there. And the Kubernetes community is really active and welcoming, so don't hesitate to reach out if you have any questions.
Okay, so I think we've covered a lot in this deep dive. We've gone from the basics of what Kubernetes is to some of its most powerful features and even some real-world applications. I have to say, I'm feeling a lot more confident in my understanding of this technology. It's definitely not as intimidating as it used to seem.
I'm glad to hear that. You've done a great job grasping these concepts. And remember, learning is an ongoing process, especially in a field as fast-moving as this one. There's always something new to discover.
That's what makes it so exciting, right?
Yeah.
But before we wrap up, what's the one key takeaway you want our listeners to remember? What's the most important thing you've learned about Kubernetes?
I think for me, it's the fact that it really levels the playing field.
Oh, interesting.
It used to be that only these huge companies with like tons of resources could build and manage these really complex applications.
Yeah.
But Kubernetes makes it possible for, smaller companies, even individuals, to
Sure.
do the same thing.
That's a really good point. It's like Kubernetes is this great equalizer, giving everyone access to the same powerful tools.
Exactly. And as, more businesses are moving online, embracing digital transformation and all of that,
Yeah.
Kubernetes is going to be a huge part of enabling that innovation and growth.
Yeah. It's a really exciting time to be in tech.
It is. It is.
But before we wrap things up, I always like to leave our listeners with something to think about.
Right.
So, what's one question that someone who's just starting to learn about Kubernetes should be asking themselves?
That's a good question. I think the most important question is, how can Kubernetes help me, solve problems
Mm.
and create value in my own way? It's a powerful tool, but it's really all about how you apply it.
Right, right. Like, what are your specific needs?
Yeah, exactly. What are your goals? What are you trying to achieve?
That's such a good point. It's like it pushes us to think beyond just the technical aspects of it
Right.
and really consider how we can use this tool to make a real impact.
Absolutely.
Awesome. Well, I think that's a perfect note to end on.
Yeah, it's been a great conversation.
It really has. I've learned so much, and I hope our listeners have too. Kubernetes is definitely a fascinating topic, and it's clear that it's playing a huge role in shaping the future of technology. So if you're interested in learning more, I highly encourage you to check out some of the resources that we'll link to in the show notes. And in the meantime, stay curious, keep experimenting, and never stop exploring.